Get on your face. Get on the get on your face. Get on your face. Get on your face. They killing me. They killing me. Roll the killing me. They killing me. They killing me. They're killing me. Let me go.
This dramatic body cam footage shows the police arresting 19-year-old Keith Moses, who just a few minutes ago had shot and killed a little girl and a news reporter in cold blood. This all happened in the same area where he had murdered yet another person earlier in the day. Chillingly, the teen showed no remorse for his actions and even appeared to be smirking as the police took him to the station. But what led him to commit these heinous crimes? It all started on February 22nd, 2023 at around 10:30 a.m. It was a lazy Wednesday morning, and a man who we'll just call Steve because his name has not been released to the public was driving around his neighborhood of Pine Hills in Orlando, Florida with his friend of 6 years, Natcha Augustin. Natcha was a 38-year-old up-and-coming rapper who went by the name of Honey D. She was described by her loved ones as a kind and loving person who is passionate about music. Natcha and Steve were just hanging out in the car and smoking weed when they came across Steve's cousin, Keith Melvin Moses. Now, Keith was bad news. At 19 years old, he was a gang member and had a lengthy criminal record that dated back to his childhood. He had been arrested for crimes like firearm possession, grand theft auto, domestic and even armed robbery. However, most of these happened while he was still a juvenile, so he never really got any real time for them. The only arrest as an adult was in 2021 after he was caught in possession of marijuana. But the amount of time he had was so small that it didn't even warrant a jail sentence.
When you have a quantity that low, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement does not test the substance, and that means the state attorney's office cannot prove the case.
On this particular day, Steve noticed that Keith was looking down and kind of depressed, so he offered to give him a ride, hoping that that would cheer him up. But that would soon prove to be a huge mistake. Keith got in the backseat of the car and sat right behind Natasha. Everything seemed fine for about 30 seconds. Then suddenly, Keith pulled out a Glock semi-automatic handgun and shot Natasha right in the back of the head. In a panic, Steve slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to a stop. But before he could process what was going on, his cousin jumped out and fled the scene. Police were immediately called to the scene at Hastings Street, where they found Natasha's lifeless body outside the passenger side of the car.
First he was moving, he fell out of the car, and now it seems like he is dead.
Steve, who is still at the crime scene, told investigators everything that happened, including the fact that the shooter was actually his cousin. He said that Keith was acting strange and sweating in the car before he pulled out his gun and shot Natasha in the chin from the back seat. At first, police thought that the shooting was gang-related or a retaliation for something that had happened, but Steve said that Keith and Natasha didn't even know each other and had not been involved in any altercation. It was just a random act of violence. Crime scene investigators were at the scene for several hours gathering evidence and interviewing witnesses. They left at around 3:30 p.m., not knowing that this was just the beginning. Dylan Lyons was a talented and motivated journalist who took his job seriously and loved what he did. Born and raised in Philadelphia, Dylan graduated from the University of Central Florida and had just gotten his dream job working as a reporter for Spectrum News in Orlando.
He was very energetic, enthusiastic. He was very driven. He was passionate about doing this.
At 24 years old, Dylan was engaged to be married to Casey Fight, and the two had plans of starting a family together. Dylan was also super close to his family and was even an acting father to his niece and nephew, who he absolutely adored. On this fateful day, Dylan and photojournalist Jesse Walden had been assigned to cover the shooting in Pine Hills. When they got there, it was already 3:59 p.m., and things had started to slowly go back to normal. After parking their unmarked van near the site of the crime, Jesse went out to the back of the van to set up his camera, while Dylan remained inside the van writing on his computer. The two journalists were so caught up in whatever they were doing that they didn't notice the man who was approaching them with a gun.
As I'm about to open my trunk, I hear gunshots, and I feel that I get hit I feel some pain in my groin, and I turn around and I'm like, oh, there must be a drive-by shooting going on. And I see that he's shooting at me. I was assuming he was shooting at a house or something behind me, and I just happened to catch a bullet. But he kept shooting at me, so I ducked behind the wheel of my car, and he walked forward and shot into my car. That ended up striking my reporter, Dylan Lyons, and killing him.
The deranged gunman turned out to be none other than Keith Moses. He had apparently gone back to the scene to continue his killing spree. Orange County Sheriff Department received a 911 call around 4:05 p.m. with reports that a man matching Keith's description had returned to the scene and was firing at news reporters. You can hear the description in the witnesses' voices as they tried to help the injured journalists.
Oh, they're trying to do CPR on him. Hold on, please. Father. He's not responsive. You bet. Come on, man. You gotta go on. You can do it. Yeah, it looks like he's been shot in the heart. Yeah, my elbow, last time, yeah, it's just sticking up.
Police arrived soon after, but the damage had already been done. Dylan was already dead, having been shot point blank in the chest. The photojournalist, Jesse, was in critical condition after being shot in the groin. He was rushed to the hospital, where he fortunately survived.
You know, Dylan was a reporter I worked with every day. You know, we were best friends. And he was just a sweet guy. He was young, and he loved, he really did a good job. He loved trying hard. And that's what we like to do. We like to push the boundaries. We like to get our hands dirty. It's just this unprovoked, senseless, random violence that no one could have saw coming.
With a ton of police officers at the scene, you'd think that Keith would try to get as far away as possible and not do anything stupid. But you'd be wrong. Apparently, he wasn't done yet. Knowing that the police were hot on his trail, Keith reportedly walked into a nearby home where 9-year-old Tiona Major lived with her family, a third grader at Pine Hills Elementary. Tiona was described as a kind, outgoing, and happy little girl who loved dancing and gymnastics.
Always top of her class, reading at a 5th grade level. I mean, that just doesn't happen overnight. She is amazing.
Tiona had just come home from elementary school and was preparing her dance items so she'd be ready when her dad got home. Her mom, Brandy, was taking a nap in her bedroom before her night job when she heard Tiona screaming, "He shot me." Apparently, Keith had gotten into the house through the sliding back door, which the family would sometimes leave unlocked to let the dog in and out, and was now firing at the innocent little girl. Tiona rushed into her mom's bedroom, where Brandy instinctively tried to protect her. Keith kept firing at the mother and daughter, hitting Tiona in the stomach and Brandy in the arm. At that moment, Brandy grabbed Tiona and they barricaded themselves in the master bathroom before calling 911.
She's bleeding, she's on the ground. Somebody help me! She can't breathe. I'm right here, please, somebody help me.
The police arrived at the house within seconds, but Keith managed to escape once again. Sadly, 9-year-old Tiona was found dead in her mom's arms. Brandy was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, but the doctors were able to save her life.
3 people are dead and 2 injured in an Orlando, Florida shooting spree. One of those killed was a journalist reporting on the incident. The Orange County Sheriff's Department says a woman was found to death in a vehicle in the Pine Hills neighborhood of Orlando. Spectrum News 13 sent reporter Dylan Lyons and a photojournalist to the scene to cover the story. According to authorities, the suspected gunman in the earlier homicide came back to the scene and fired on Lyons and the News 13 photojournalist.
Deputies located 2 men who had been shot in or near a vehicle. They are a News 13 reporter and photographer.
Detectives believe the same suspect then entered a home and shot an unidentified woman and her 9-year-old daughter, killing the little girl. Police say the mother and photojournalist are both in the hospital.
The senseless murders shook the entire community, with many struggling to understand why it happened. Dylan's friends and colleagues were especially shaken by the news of his death. One reporter even wept on air as she reported his death from the hospital.
Every reporter's absolutely worst nightmare. We go home at night afraid that something like this will occur. And that is what happened here.
Do anything to have my Dylan back in my arms. My heart's broken when Dylan was killed. I died too. I just feel like I died too.
She had a desire to help people and do for people. She wanted to be remembered for the love that she gave.
Meanwhile, Keith was arrested that same day after the police found him walking casually near the crime scene. Bodycam footage of the arrest, which has since gone viral with over 2 million views, shows the officers placing Keith on his stomach and cuffing his hands behind his back as he continuously screams that he could not breathe.
Get on your face. Get on your face. Get on your face. Get on your face. They killing me. They killing me. Roll the fuck over me. They killing me! They killing me! Let me go!
After the police had managed to restrain him, they found the gun he had used in the murders, which was now empty.
Glock 40, a semi-automatic handgun from inside of his pants. That gun was still hot to the touch, meaning it had just been fired.
During the arrest, police noted that Keith's eyes were dilated and he was high on something. They took him to the hospital to get him checked since he kept complaining that he couldn't breathe. But while at the hospital, Keith reportedly started fighting with the nurses and had to be restrained by officers. He also refused to talk to investigators and only smiled at them and made gun symbols pointing at his head. When he was transported to the sheriff's office for an interview, Keith pretended to be asleep to avoid answering questions. But although his eyes were closed, the officers could see that he was not asleep because he kept shaking his legs and making silly faces at the officers. When he was left alone in the room, he stood up from the chair and looked directly at the camera. But then when the officers came back in and tried talking to him, he smiled at them and pretended to be asleep again. At one point, Keith attempted to escape from the interrogation room and even fought with officers when they tried to restrain him. Eventually, Keith was charged with multiple counts of murder, including first-degree murder in the case of Natasha Augustin. Keith has since pleaded not guilty to the charges and is currently being held without bond as he awaits his trial. If convicted, he stands the chance of getting a life sentence or the death penalty. It's still not clear what his motive was to kill all these people. What do you think about this case? Let me know in the comment section, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.